Slay the Spire is a game built around endings. You can climb the tower and slay the heart, or more commonly, if you're like me, die to Gremlinob in Act 1. But there's actually a third option, a mode with no purpose, no balance, and no upper limit, a kind of purgatory, with only you, a deck full of duplicated garbage, and enemies who have upwards of 10,000 HP. I'm talking about Endless Mode. Now, if you've never heard of this mode, I'm not surprised. It's a mode that gets surprisingly little coverage here on YouTube, and it's tucked away in the custom run menu. This is interesting to me since there's a lot of content that's exclusive to this game mode, and we'll talk about that as we go. I think most people ignore this mode, and the ones who don't usually stop after a few loops, but today, we're going to push the game to its limits. We're going for floor 1000, not to prove anything, not for glory, but simply because the game let me. And honestly, it was a mistake.
I don't even want to be around anymore.
Now, the first question to ask is who is best suited for this challenge? This is something that doesn't matter too much as every character is very capable, and eventually we do plan on getting the Prismatic Shard, so their individual decks aren't too much of a consideration in the long term. The bigger factor is the unique relics available for each. We can immediately rule out Defect. While he is one of my favorites, his relics and just general playstyle revolves around scaling. Something like a Dark Orb may be powerful, but it takes a lot of turns and thus a lot of time. Silent can be ruled out for a similar reason. Shiv builds are fun, but playing 10 cards that deal a little damage versus one card that does a lot of damage is just inefficient and can actually screw you over in the late game. This leaves Ironclad and Watcher. While both of these characters can front load damage very well, I went with Ironclad simply because I enjoy playing him more, and I think his starting relic will be more useful in the long term. While this starts out pretty similar to a regular run, there are some things we need to watch out for, specifically when it comes to relics. This mainly encompasses boss relics, but a few regular ones as well. The downsides for each of the boss relics is something that we need to play around for 1000 stages. So, a Velvet Choker, for instance, limits you to 6 cards a turn. Even if it doesn't affect the current build, it's something to steer clear of since the deck will change a lot over time. The big ones to avoid are pretty obvious: Velvet Choker, Busted Crown, Ectoplasm, Fusion Hammer, Sozu, and Runic Dome. I also avoided Snecko Eye and Runic Pyramid. Snecko Eye, I guess, could have been okay, but the variability is a little scary later on, and it just takes one bad roll from Snecko to have catastrophic results. And Runic Pyramid is one of my favorite relics. It's great for setups in a normal run, but in this case, it's very important that I'm able to cycle through my cards for shenanigans later on. Real quick, I want to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Factor. Guys, Factor is the #1 meal service that delivers chef-crafted meals straight to your door. It's the 2025 food consumption meta, alright? Factor has an abundance of options no matter what your diet is. They got keto, vegan, calorie smart. Even if you're a little baby like me, they're bound to have something you enjoy. With over 35 meals per week, they make maintaining your sustenance easier than ever. I personally have used Factor quite a bit in the last year. I had a really bad habit of using the apps to deliver food, and Factor is just a much better alternative. Not only is it cheaper, but it's tastier as well. Factor eliminates the hassle of prepping, cooking, or cleaning up. Simply heat and enjoy in less than 5 minutes. Today I'm having the truffle mushroom chicken breast with herb roasted potatoes. It's perfectly seasoned and it genuinely tastes like something you'd get at a restaurant. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code DisputedFB50 to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code DisputedFB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. Thank you to Factor as always for supporting the channel. Now back to the video. And with that, moving on to the run itself. No starting bonus this time because it is a custom run. The first few floors were pretty straightforward. First card I picked up was a Perfected Strike. I then picked up a Carnage as well as a Pommel Strike, which immediately paid off on floor 5 when I got a Sundial out of a chest. Sundial is one of Ironclad's best relics as it allows you to go infinite pretty easily if you have few enough cards in your deck. I'll quickly explain how this works for the unenlightened. Sundial gives you 2 energy every 3 times you shuffle your draw pile. So if you remove or exhaust enough cards in your deck until you have all of your cards in your hand except one, playing a Pommel Strike will draw that card and shuffle your deck. And if you have a second Pommel Strike, you can do it again and you will draw your first Pommel Strike back into your hand. This then creates a feedback loop where you're constantly playing cards and constantly getting energy. Now, it doesn't have to be 2 Pommel Strikes. There's a number of cards that can do this, especially on Ironclad. Pommel Strike is very notable though, because once it's upgraded, it becomes a draw 2, and a draw 2 will shuffle your deck twice instead of once, making it even easier to generate energy. This is a little trickier than it sounds. The hardest part of going for a strategy like this is it really requires you to have a slim deck, and can take a while to set up depending on how many cards you have. But finding this relic early is great, so I know not to pick up too many cards. Next, I upgraded my Carnage and picked up a True Grit. This allows me to have some block as well as getting rid of some cards in my deck. I got a Bottled Flame for my next relic, which honestly I shouldn't have picked up as I know I'm going to run into it again later. But I did, and I chose Pommel Strike as the bottled card for guaranteed turn 1 card draw. I didn't realize it at this time, but bottling a card means it cannot be removed from your deck at any point, so whether I like it or not, Pommel Strike is here to stay. Lagavulin was my first boss, and he did not put up much of a fight. I was rewarded with an early feed, which I actually have a limited time to use, so I immediately started farming it as often as possible. Closing out Act 1, I picked up a Shrug It Off to unlock the Infinite, and I took on the Tri-Sentries as my last elite. It was a pretty straightforward fight, and I picked up a Dark Embrace as my next card reward. Power cards are great as well, because once played, they are removed from the deck, and since we're already going for cards that exhaust other cards, this will help me set up the Infinite a lot faster. This run is already looking really good. At my first shop, I went for a Strike removal as well as the Orrery Shop Relic. I didn't want to add too much here, I just picked up another Feed as well as a Burning Pact for more card draw and more exhaust. After this, I upgraded True Grit, and then it was time to fight the Guardian. This fight was not an issue. I got slapped around a bit at the beginning, but just by exhausting as many cards as possible, I was actually able to set up the Infinite, which does not happen very often in Act 1. This is something that will be hard to achieve in most hallway fights because it does take quite a few turns, but I now at least have an answer for the longer elite and boss fights. Or so I thought. I can make this more consistent by going for card removals, but the run is far from being solved. There are some serious limitations to the strategy later on that make it completely unviable, but for now at least, this is what I'm going to try to build into. My card reward from the boss was a Fiend Fire, which is just what I was looking for. Lets me exhaust all the cards in my hand, which helps with the Infinite, but it's also just a great card in general for damage output. I also picked up a Mark of Pain, which is an exclusive Ironclad relic that gives you 1 energy, but shuffles 2 wounds into your deck. There is definitely an argument to be made for ignoring this relic, as those wounds are something I'm going to have to deal with for the rest of the run. It also hurts me a lot in the short term, as I need to get rid of cards in order to go infinite. But my deck was pretty energy hungry at this point, and I have plenty of exhaust and card draw to make this manageable. Even with the downside, my thinking was it'll be easier to go infinite with it than without it. I don't really know if this is true. Feel free to roast me in the comments. By the way, I am far from an expert at this game, and I'm always trying to learn more. But with that, Act 1 is complete, and it's time to move on to Act 2. While Act 1 was very chill and uneventful, Act 2 was the most stressful act of the entire run, and I almost died at multiple points. The early Act 2 combats were not very notable. I did take some abuse from a few enemies, but by this point I already had over 100 HP from my 2 feeds, so I had some health to spare. This is where I started to realize the limitations of this deck. My entire build was built around the Sundial Infinite, so I was about as effective as a wet noodle until I had it set up. I didn't pick up any new cards here except a Curse on floor 22. The next card I upgraded was Burning Pact for even more card draw and possibly some synergy with Fiend Fire, and then it was time to fight an elite. The Book of Stabbing put the fear of God and anime inside me. I was woefully unprepared for this fight. Outside of my True Grit Plus and Shrug It Off, I didn't really have much block going in here. Because of this, the Book of Stabbing not only did a boatload of damage, but worse, added a bunch of wounds to my deck, making it virtually impossible to go infinite. Turn after turn, I struggled to do anything while he just kept slapping me around. I came extremely close to dying in this fight, getting down to 6 HP at one point, 1 turn away from being decimated. I was only able to get through it by using all of my potions. I paid a heavy price for my arrogance, but I did manage to get through. I picked up an Immolate as my card reward because I was seriously lacking any area of effect cards, and Act 2 is notorious for its multiple enemy combats and elite fights. This, however, was a very short-term decision, as not only is Immolate an extra card that slows me down, it also adds a burn to my deck, making it even harder to go infinite. But as proven in the last fight, that's not always an option. While I just barely managed to scrape by in the last fight, I wasn't out of the woods yet. I had another elite coming up in just a few floors. Knowing it was either going to be Slavers or Gremlin Leader, I upgraded the immolate at the next rest site. I probably could have healed here, but I picked up a fairy in a bottle from the Book of Stabbing, and it provided me with far too much confidence. I immediately regretted this when I ran into the Slavers on floor 27. The Tri-Slavers are known for their constant damage output, and unless you can take them out quickly, they can kill you in just a few turns. Luckily, I was able to kill the back Slaver on turn 1 with help from a fire pot, but again, I didn't have much block in the deck, so I ended up popping the fairy in a bottle immediately on turn 1. I also forgot that Slavers also add wounds to your deck, which again prevented me from going infinite. I was able to get through this fight okay by maximizing block as much as possible, but I was looking pretty rough. I was running out of potions, running out of health, and with the cards I added in this act, it was much harder to go infinite. Furthermore, I had yet another elite just 2 floors away. I did foolishly pick up an Armaments here, not that it's a great card right now or anything, I just wanted a higher block density in my deck since I seemed to be getting my shit pushed in. In hindsight, this was probably not the best move, and one I ended up regretting. My next floor was a shop, and by the grace of God, I was given a medical kit. Probably the most clutch thing I could have found here, and it single-handedly saved the run. This shop-only relic allows me to play status cards like Wounds or Burns for free, and when they're played, they also exhaust. So with Dark Embrace in play, these status cards will basically do nothing. This also makes the downside from the Mark of Pain pretty negligible. This would have been extremely helpful 5 floors earlier, but I'm definitely happy to see it on floor 28 instead of 250. I also bought a Sentinel since it was on sale, and it's just more energy and block, both of which I desperately need. I also removed another strike, completely forgetting about my curse. Oops. I almost died again in the next hallway fight. I lost 25 HP in this combat, taking me down to 14 HP after the Burning Blood activation. But I was rewarded handsomely with a Liquid Memories potion. The card reward was also extremely good, being a Second Wind Plus. At this point, I needed cards that block, and I needed cards that exhaust other cards. Second Wind fills both of these niches extremely well, and on top of that, it's upgraded. So even though I had low HP, I felt confident enough to take on another elite. I did have Wing Boots from Book of Stabbing earlier in the act, so I could have gotten out of it if I really wanted, but I'm stubborn and took it on anyway. Gremlin Leader was next, and luckily this fight wasn't nearly as bad as the previous two. By this point, my deck was really starting to come together after being on life support for the last few stages. That said, it wasn't quite there. I did have to use multiple potions yet again to get through this fight without taking damage, but that's a small price to pay for not dying. I got an Akabeko as my relic, and I picked up another Pommel Strike as my card reward. I know, I keep taking cards when I said I was going to try to keep my deck small, but this one really was necessary. Reason being, there is one card in particular I'm looking for right now that turns this into a god deck. That card being Corruption. This card will not only make all of my skills free, it will exhaust them when played. Both of these effects are extremely good, and when combined with Dark Embrace, it will let me exhaust all of my skills in essentially one turn. However, there is a catch. In order to do the Sundial Infinite, I need both Pommel Strike and Shrug It Off. Shrug It Off is a skill, and with Corruption in play, I won't be able to use it more than once, which obviously breaks the Infinite. I can get around this, however, by having a second Pommel Strike. Since it's not a skill, it won't exhaust, and I can continue to go infinite. I had one more combat before the boss, and while I did get into a bit of a stalemate with the Chosen, I got through this fight okay for the most part. Knowing the boss was likely going to kill me at 26 HP, I chose to rest up, which ended up being the right call since the Collector did 36 damage to me on turn 3. After that, it was just a race to go infinite as soon as possible before I got killed. Luckily, I was able to achieve this just a few turns later. The medical kit is just absurdly strong in this deck, and with that, the most stressful act of this entire challenge was finally over. And for our card reward, well, what do you know? We find our Corruption. This was a major turning point for the run, and from here on out, things would get a lot easier. For the boss relic, I went for Pandora's Box, which ended up being really good. Cleave, Twin Strike, and Fire Breathing are pretty trash, but Warcry is at least draw neutral once upgraded, and draw positive with Dark Embrace. Another Sentinel is great, it just adds more energy to the deck, And a barricade lets me keep my block in between turns, which is really helpful since with corruption, I'm now going to be playing all my skills in one turn. This leaves me literally defenseless if I have to end my turn for any reason, which is something that's unavoidable if my Act 3 boss is Time Eater or the Awakened one. Starting off Act 3, I went to a shop pretty much immediately, where I picked up another Dark Embrace. I also removed Perfected Strike, again completely forgetting about the curse in my deck. It's not very consequential. Perfected Strike is basically a curse at this point now that all my strikes are gone, but you better believe it triggered my OCD watching it back. On the next floor, I tripped and fell. This could have been pretty bad, but I was more than happy to get rid of my fire breathing. The next event was Mind Bloom, and I'm not about to forsake healing for, the next 962 floors? And I'm in no position to take on normality either, so boss fight it is. This event really let me gauge just how strong my deck was at this point. Double Dark Embrace goes extremely hard, and I was able to achieve an infinite on turn 2. A far cry from where I was just 10 floors prior. The next floor, we found a Bottled Tornado, and you better believe I'm bottling that corruption. At this point, I was going through floors pretty quick. My next elite was the Nemesis, and again, I had an infinite setup on turn 2, but since he had Intangible, it was agonizingly slow, and it took me way too long to realize I could just do it next turn instead of slamming my head against the wall over and over again. I picked up another True Grit and went on about my business. I also picked up a Power Through Plus. This card is kind of insane in this deck. If I have Corruption and both Dark Embraces in play, this card is 0 cost, gives me 20 block, and lets me draw 5 additional cards. Just nutty. My next elite was the Giant Head, and he was easier than most regular encounters. The Sundial Infinite was really no match. I got a Gambling Chip from him, which was great since I still had this stupid Writhe in my deck. No way to avoid that, it's not like I could have gotten rid of it. After that, my next combat was the Transient, who I was actually able to kill, thanks again to our good old friend, the Sundial Infinite. The card reward was Feel No Pain, which I gladly took and upgraded at the next rest site. And with that, I'm already on floor 50, and it's time to fight the Act 3 boss. Donu and Deka is probably the best fight I could have gotten here, but the Awakened one or Time Eater probably would have been alright as well. I wish I had more to say about this fight. I had my Sundial Infinite set up by turn 3, and was able to take them out pretty easily. I did get a nice feed in on Donu though, for any achievement hunters out there. By the end of the act, I had 145 max HP, which is good since I'm gonna need all I can get. This is normally where the game would end or continue on to Act 4, but Endless Mode is obviously a little different. Instead of ending, it's treated like any other Act boss. I'm offered a card reward, potion, and a boss relic. I went ahead and took the Coffee Dripper since I already have Burning Blood, and there's plenty of other healing relics that I'm bound to run into at some point. For the card reward, I took an Exhume. This card is not incredibly useful right now, but it's going to help me a lot in the long term. You see, while the Sundial Infinite has carried me this far, and can continue to do so for a little while longer, my deck is going to need to evolve beyond it if I want any chance of surviving. Let me introduce you to Blights. No, not that one. Blights are an exclusive to Endless Mode, and they act as a sort of negative relic that you carry with you for the rest of your run. New Blights are obtained each time you loop, and they really throw a wrench in our plans. These first two are what you would expect from looping in a roguelike. The Spear of Blight increases enemies' damage by 100%, and the Shield of Blight increases their HP by 50%. It's only fair. These two specifically are stacked every time we loop, so as we progress, we'll start seeing enemies doing more damage and having more health. Now that might sound bad, I know, but there's really nothing to worry about. It's the other Blights that are more of a threat, and the first one that's added is the Mimic Infestation. This Blight transforms all treasure rooms into elites, and elites no longer drop relics. This is really bad. It makes elites way more common and gives you way less of a reason to fight them. This can really slow down the rate at which you're able to acquire relics, basically limiting them to events and shops. Luckily, I did find a shovel by this point, allowing me to dig for relics at rest sites, and it's a good thing too, because after floor 48, the shovel will not spawn. This is also the case for Peace Pipe, which unfortunately I did not find. I think they made it this way in the regular game so you're not finding them in Act 4, but in this mode I'm pretty sure this is a bug. Even the wiki states that Endless Mode is excluded, but I just don't think that's the case. I did not find a Peace Pipe at any point in this run, and believe me, I looked. It's not the end of the world, there are still plenty of ways to remove cards, but it did make me a little sad I couldn't get every relic. All this to say, the Mimic infestation is not great, but it's definitely manageable with the shovel. I was much more worried about the upcoming Blights in subsequent loops, but I'll cover those when I get there. I'm going to start going through the run a lot faster as there are fewer notable things happening. Not really much happened in Loop 1, Act 1. I'm still a lot stronger than the Act 1 enemies, even with the added HP. I was basically just farming feed as much as possible. I did get a Shirk in this act, which is nice and will help me scale my strength, but it's really not that necessary. I took a very inoffensive tiny house as my boss relic, and I continued this pace going into Loop 1, Act 2. On floor 72, I got a really good shop. I picked up a Singing Bowl for even more max HP, and the infamous Prismatic Shard. This relic will allow me to get cards from other characters, not just Ironclad. This opens us up for some pretty crazy and rarely utilized synergies. It's really fun. The first card I ended up picking up was a Backflip Plus. Nothing too crazy here, it's basically just a better Shrug It Off. I didn't pick up anything else until the Act boss, grabbing myself an Alchemize, which goes well with the Potion Belt I also found in this act. I took an empty cage, removing 2 cards, and I was already on to the final act of the first loop. Overall, this was a pretty uneventful act. I crossed the 300 max HP threshold on floor 93. The Singing Bowl, along with the double feed, was allowing me to rack up a lot of HP very quickly. I was mainly focused on removals this act, stuff like Bash and an unupgraded Warcry, but I did pick up a Genetic Algorithm on a floor 98. This card is absolutely ridiculous. It clearly was not designed with Endless Mode in mind. It increases its block value every time it's played, and since I'm only a 10th of the way through the run, I have a lot of time to build this up. It does exhaust on use, but that's not an issue. All of my skills exhaust with Corruption in play anyway, and with Exhume, I can play it multiple times each combat. Floor 101 was once again an Act 3 boss. This time it was the Waken one. This did freak me out a little, since I have a lot of powers in my deck, which make him scale a ton, but thanks to Unceasing Top, I was able to go infinite turn 1 and took him down without an issue. This brings me to the next part of this run. We've completed another loop, which means it's time for a new Blight. And this is the one I've been dreading for the entire run. Let me introduce you to the Time Maze. The Time Maze limits the amount of cards you can play each turn to 15. When I said the Sundial Infinite wouldn't work forever, this is what I meant. Now, even though I can't truly go infinite, right now I have enough block in my deck that I can scrape by. Barricade has suddenly become a very important card, allowing me to preserve my block between turns. This gives me a pretty big safety net and lowers the amount of cards I need to play each turn. Again though, I need to start phasing out Sundial as it will become increasingly unviable as we continue onward. I did get some good news on floor 108, finding a Preserved Insect. This relic reduces all elites HP by 25%. This is an amazing relic with how common elites are now and their ever increasing HP values. And then on floor 110, I picked up a Prayer Wheel at the shop. This doubles my card rewards on each regular combat. This works especially well with Singing Bowl, allowing me to get up to 4 additional max HP instead of taking cards. This is also where I picked up a Searing Blow. This, ladies and gentlemen, but mostly gentlemen if we're being real, is how I take this deck in a new direction. Get used to this card because you'll be seeing it a lot from here on out. Searing Blow is a very unique card. It's the only card in the game that can be upgraded multiple times. Each upgrade increases its damage, which is slow going at first. The first upgrade only increases its damage by 4, but the amount of damage is increased with every upgrade. So the second upgrade is +5, third is +6, and so on. This gets crazy fast. It is yet another card that is not designed for Endless Mode. So while it will take some time to get going, if I upgrade this card at every opportunity, it will be one-shotting bosses in no time. This is also a very effective way to get around the Time Maze. The Act boss was the Guardian again, and this fight almost went really badly. My deck was in a pretty precarious spot at this point. I was trying to evolve it into something new, but it wasn't quite there. I was basically carried by my Genetic Algorithm, which was already giving over 50 block by this point. I used the Sundial combo as much as possible, but of course I did have to keep ending my turn. For my card reward, I picked up a Nightmare. This silent card allows you to choose a card in your hand, and the following turn it will add 3 additional copies of that card into your hand. This can allow for some serious shenanigans. I'd even go as far as calling them shenanigans. This is a very powerful effect, and it's normally balanced by being a very expensive card, costing 3 energy to play. But with all my energy relics, and more importantly a bottled corruption, that's not something I have to worry about. One of the ways I can abuse this card is with Genetic Algorithm. With Nightmare, I can play it even more times each combat, building up my block even faster. Now, I can't directly target Genetic Algorithm with Nightmare. Well, I can, but if I do, the game will recognize the cards put in my hand as separate from the original card, which is not great since we can't increase its block count that way. But what I can do is play Genetic Algorithm and then target Exhume with Nightmare, and then on my next turn, I can just continuously use Exhume to get Algorithm back in my hand and play the same one over and over again. Another thing I can do by targeting Exhume is actually Exhume the Nightmare back into my hand, at which point all I have to do is target another Exhume, and I can do the same thing again on the next turn. Genetic Algorithm more than covers block, so I can do this as many times as I want and build up Algorithm to be an absolute unit. This is just scratching the surface of some of the crazy things you can do with this card. I'll talk about it some more later once we get more cards in our deck that can utilize it. On floor 126, I got Calipers, which is essentially Barricade the Relic. It allows me to only lose 15 block a turn instead of all of it. Now normally that minus 15 block is very significant, but since we're now dealing with block in the hundreds, this is basically just as effective as Barricade. So obviously my next move was to remove Barricade at the next shop. At this point my goal was to get Genetic Algorithm to 999 block. It can go beyond this, but that is the max amount of HP you can have on your character at one time. In order to reach this, I have to play Algorithm 333 times, which is a lot. So with my newly acquired Nightmare, I immediately got to work farming it. Unfortunately, Tragedy would strike on floor 135. Some good news and some bad news. The bad news is the footage for the next 37 stages is unusable. The good news is I now have access to Copilot Vision, probably the best relic in the game if we're being real. I just want to give a quick shout out to dumbass Microsoft Edge for opening this window unprompted. I wasn't able to see this until much later because my recording software just does not like Slay the Spire for whatever reason, so I had to do a bunch of workarounds to get this to record properly. Unfortunately, one of these workarounds made me unable to see this window while I was playing, so I didn't catch it until much later. Not much really happened during these floors. It was basically an hour and a half of me farming Genetic Algorithm, which I did max out. I also got Searing Blow upgraded to plus 10, which isn't one-shotting enemies yet, but it will be very soon. Also, on stage 153, I got my next Blight, Muzzle. This one prevents me from gaining any further max HP for the rest of the run. This is why it was really important to farm feed as much as possible early on. At this point, I had 471 HP, which is pretty substantial, although I was a little sad I couldn't get it to 500. My deck didn't really change much in this time. I removed a few cards like my thieves because obviously they weren't very useful to me anymore. I did add one card to my deck on floor 169 though, a little card called Vault. This Watcher card is so unbelievably broken. What it does is end my current turn and start the next turn immediately, skipping the enemy's turn entirely. Vault essentially resets your hand and gives you energy. That's cool and all, but it has another even stronger effect. This card resets the time maze. That's right, with this card I can now get around the 15 move limit, allowing me to go infinite once again. This card does exhaust, but that's not a problem. Using the same combo of Nightmare and Exhume, I can continuously summon this card back into my hand. Vault makes this combo even better because now I can have Nightmare activate on the same turn I played it. Between this combo and my maxed out Genetic Algorithm, I'm not under much threat anymore and have basically zero chance of dying. And in the worst case scenario, I have a Bottled Fairy to bail me out. I'm not even at floor 200 yet, and I basically have the run solved. My goal now is just to see how crazy things can get over the next 800 stages. So, in conclusion, I'm sorry to say, I will not be making Microsoft Edge my default browser. You can just fuck right off with that. On floor 204, I received my last Blight, the Grotesque Trophy. This Blight adds a curse exclusive to this mode into your deck. This curse is called Pride, and it's really not that big of a deal. It's innate, so you start with it in your deck, and if it's still in your hand at the end of your turn, it will duplicate itself and put itself in your hand again next turn. This Blight also doesn't just add one of these, it adds 3, and will add another 3 every time we loop from here on out. Now, if this happened to me 100 floors earlier, it might have been scary, but by this point, I can more than deal with it. The easiest way around it is with the gambling chip. With this relic, I can just immediately discard them from my hand. Easy. Also, if I'm going to shops as often as possible, I can just easily remove these from my deck within a few floors. At this point, my deck was basically finished, so after removing all the prides, I started focusing on removing cards that were helpful earlier in the run, but not so much now. Stuff like Sentinels, Armaments, and Warcry. But there were still a few cards I wanted to pick up just to speed up going through these floors. The first one on floor 190 was Secret Weapon. This card just lets me put any attack from my draw pile into my hand. This just lets me play Searing Blow sooner if I don't draw it immediately. And then on 203, I grabbed a Secret Technique. Very similar to Secret Weapon, but instead of letting me grab an attack from my draw pile, I can draw a skill. Ironically, Secret Weapon is a skill, so I can use Secret Technique to draw Secret Weapon, and then Secret Weapon to draw Searing Blow. I do remove these cards later on though, because there's actually another card that does this exact thing, just much better and faster. That card being Omniscience. This Watcher card, of course it's a Watcher card, lets you target any card in your draw pile and will instantly play that card twice. Normally, this card is balanced with its absurd 4 energy requirement, but once again, this is a skill, and Corruption makes it free. Using this card to target Searing Blow is a really quick way to end a fight, since if the first proc kills its target, the second proc will pick another target. This sped up the run substantially, and for some reason the game kept offering them to me. I was offered a second one on floor 276, a third on 319, and a fourth on 345. I of course took all of these. On floor 335, I got a very interesting relic, Circlet. This relic starts appearing once you've exhausted all of the available relics in the pool. In this case, it was the Augmenter event. I chose to obtain the relic, but since I already had it, the Spire gave me one of these. It does nothing, and these will start to appear a lot more frequently, as by this point, I have the majority of the relics in the game. On floor 354, I got a card duplication event. These events are awesome because I can target the cards I've invested a lot in, either my plus 38 Searing Blow, which deals a whopping 867 damage, or my Genetic Algorithm, which by this point was worth 1,213 block. I chose the Searing Blow simply because it's more useful and will make Omniscience more consistent. I do wish I could have gotten this a little later, since Searing Blow isn't yet at the level where it's one-shotting everything. It takes out most normal enemies instantly, but isn't quite as good at killing bosses. It's alright though, because I've held off on buying the Dolly's Mirror Shop Relic until later in the run for this exact reason. Believe it or not, I'm actually about 75% of the way done with this run at this point, even though I haven't gotten to floor 500 yet. The first 200 floors encompass the bulk of the time spent on this run. There's really not a lot of decision making needed past this point, and most floors are completed in less than a minute. Not as many interesting things were happening either, so I'm going to go through the last 600 floors pretty quick. On floor 480, I picked up the Necronomicon. This did add a permanent curse to my deck, and Omnimori was long since depleted. This relic plays the first attack of each turn twice. I thought this would work like Omniscience and auto-target another enemy if the first one is killed, but it doesn't. The first one dies, it just doesn't do anything else. Pretty unfortunate, and in hindsight, I definitely regret taking it. Really nothing happened in the 500s. Nothing did until floor 658 when I got another card duplication event. This time my Searing Blow was really juicy, being upgraded 91 times and dealing 4,471 damage. With 2 of those, I felt comfortable removing my other Searing Blow from the other duplication event, which was only at plus 41 at this point. I was able to get both of these cards to 100 upgrades, and then on floor 784, I bought the Dolly's Mirror and got a third Omega powerful Searing Blow. I picked up a Ritual Dagger on floor 789. This is another card that scales well over a long period of time, but by this point I didn't have much time to scale it, and it was basically impossible to use because the enemies just had a ton of health by this point, and Searing Blow was just decimating everything in its path, which was not really giving me much of a chance to use it. Ritual Dagger also doesn't scale nearly as well as Searing Blow in general, so I ended up getting rid of it. I didn't know this, but Searing Blow's effect actually gets bigger with every upgrade, and a Searing Blow upgraded 100 times has a massive blast. I absolutely love this, it's incredibly satisfying. That's really kind of it. I got another card duplication on floor 886. This time I chose to duplicate my genetic algorithm because I had 3 searing blows and I figured it would make for a cooler deck. Floor 1000 was just this random ass stage. It wasn't a boss fight or anything. I did do a few more stages because I was 1 upgrade away from having a searing blow that deals 10,000 damage, which is just insane. But that's it. I realized this is a really abrupt and anticlimactic ending. I felt that way in the moment as well, but I didn't really see a point in finishing off the act. It would have just been more of the same. I would have fought the heart to end it off, but unfortunately you aren't able to in custom games, so that's kind of it. Yo, Future Disputed here. This is actually not true. There's actually a separate checkbox at the beginning of the run that lets you enable the final act. I didn't realize this until I started editing this, so I think I probably would have been able to fight the heart if I could read, but there's really nothing I can do about it now, so my bad. This was my deck at the end of the run. It only had 15 cards, which is pretty small, all things considered. Overall, this challenge went a lot quicker than I expected it to. When I did this in Risk of Rain 2 back in the day, it took like 25 hours, and I think this one was only about 9 hours total. And the bulk of that was the earlier floors and just farming genetic algorithm. You could probably get this done in like 5 or 6 if you were really speedrunning. But that's gonna do it. Let me know what you thought of this video and if there are any videos you'd like to see me do for Spire in the future. I feel like this game is really underrepresented on YouTube and I definitely want to do more content on it. This video was really fun to do. I haven't done a challenge video in this format for a few years and it's pretty refreshing to talk about a different game for once. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to drop a like. It really helps the video in the algorithm, and subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you to my members for supporting the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.